Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, good evening, everyone. Again, welcome to our CLERB Town Hall meeting, special meeting. If we could have roll call, please. Pastor Spriggs, are you there? Okay, I don't see that. Mr. Parker?
Yes, we'll have Eliza call the roll.
Okay,
Eliza
thank you.
Hugie, are you there?
Hello? Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead and call the roll. Ms.
Okay.
Hugie. Thank you.
Susan Youngflesh. Eileen Delaney.
Here.
Pastor Spriggs. Buki Domingos.
Here.
Nadia Keen Ayub.
Here.
Bonnie Kink. Marianne Pintar. Marianne Pintar. Tim Ware.
Here.
G.I. Wilson.
Here.
And Ms. Hugie, Ms. Pintar is here. Vice Chair Delaney, she is here. Ms. Kank will be a couple of minutes late. At this
Okay,
point,
thank
Vice
you.
Chair Delaney, you have a quorum.
We do have a quorum?
Yes, you do.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
This is Pastor Spriggs. I apologize for being late. We have a power outage over here.
Yeah, we have major rain right here too. I'm glad you're with us here. So welcome, everyone. Our first agenda item and only agenda item is new business. It's our CLERB Town Hall pertaining to the Center for Policing Equity report commissioned by the San Diego Sheriff's Department. I'd like to just caution everyone that because of regulations applicable to special meetings, comments, questions, and discussions should be related and relevant only to the CPE report. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our moderators, Board Member Buki Domingos and Executive Officer Paul Parker.
Thank you, Vice Chair Delaney. I'll turn it over to Ms. Domingos.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our first board-led town hall here at CLERB. We're very excited to see a lot of folks showing up to our meeting, and the main goal for this meeting is to listen to our community that we serve, to hear your grievances, to hear your concerns, and to listen with an open mind, and to ensure that at the end of this town hall, that voices are not just listened to, but also validated. And Paul and myself will be moderating this town hall. I am very grateful for all the board members that showed up here today. And the main and only agenda item is talking about, racial inequities, and talking also about the main goal while we're here today is to also listen to our folks from CPE We'll give them a chance to introduce themselves. I'll pass the mic soon to Paul Parker. But I just wanted to thank everyone for coming here tonight, and we really appreciate the community showing up to this meeting and also taking this very seriously, because this is the best way that CLERB can best serve you, when we listen to you, and especially your concerns. So I'll pass this back to Mr. Parker, who is going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Domingos. Thank you for the opportunity. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, all of the attendees and panelists. This is a first for CLERB. This is the first, as Ms. Domingos said, our first town hall in many, many years, if not the first ever, as far as going at it independently. Our focus over the last couple of months, if anyone who's followed us will know, has been the racial disparity and also deaths in custody. And so this is our first town hall. What we're going to talk about the Center for Policing Equity's report on racial disparity as they have identified within the Sheriff's Department. And at this point, I was going to turn it back over to Ms. Domingos to introduce our folks who are speaking from the Center for Policing Equity. But real quickly, just bear with me as I get their names real quick. I know Jadi Chang, I have been talking to most recently, and then Jenny Schutz. And then I also want to welcome, I think it's Matthew Graham, and then Christopher. Is Christopher Mebius here? There he is. All right, so with that, Jadi, I'll turn it over to you. What's going to happen tonight, I apologize, is the CP is going to do about a 25-minute presentation, after which there'll be some questions. Any questions that we have, we'll have a discussion with the board and members of the public or whatnot. We're going to limit those questions depending on how many speakers we have as far as how many minutes. Obviously, minimum of 3, but if we can do a little bit more, we will. But we have a lot of attendees. So with that, I'll shut up and I will turn it over to Jadi Chang.
Thanks, Mr. Parker. I'll actually pass it over to Janie Schutz to start us off.
Hi, and I'm Janie Schutz, and I'm going to ask Matthew Graham if you would go ahead and share the screen. And there we are. Wonderful. I just wanted to very much say a good evening to you all, and on behalf of our co-founders, Dr. Philip Atiba Goff and Dr. Tracy Kazee, the Center for Policing Equity is pleased to have been asked by the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board to present our report findings called the Justice Navigator Assessment, which speaks to our work with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. Next slide, please. There are 4 of us here from CPE, and we're based all over the country. So this is fun for us too. Our first will be Matthew Graham. He is our data analyst manager. And as you see, we've added a short background on each of us so you can take a look. The second will be Christopher Mebius, our data acquisition manager. We have Jadi Chang, our community engagement coordinator, and myself. My name is Janie Schutz, and I am an implementation specialist at the Center for Policing Equity. Next slide, please. Matt, thank you, thank you. During our time together, I will begin. I'm going to give a little bit of background about the partnership that CPE has had with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and give some departmental context. I'll then turn it over to Christopher Mebius. He'll give an overview of CPE's data expectations and what's called our data gap analysis, which is really a favorite document of most agencies. So we'll be sharing the San Diego County Sheriff's Department's data gap analysis. He'll turn it over to Matthew Graham, who will give an overview of the Justice Navigator findings. And finally, Jadi Chang will tie things up and talk a little bit about resources available through the Justice Navigator. Next slide. A little bit about who CPE is, the Center for Policing Equity. We conduct work that is powered by science. We produce analyses identifying causes of racial disparities in public safety, and we advocate for large-scale and meaningful change. We use data to help build a more fair and just system. We do this by partnering with law enforcement and communities. And our aim is really to bridge the divide of communication intergenerational mistrust, and pain. Next slide. Our partnership with San Diego began in June of 2020 when we started working together. We partnered to examine policing practices and behavior from 2016 to 2020. CPE analyzed use of force, traffic stops, and non-traffic stop data provided to us by the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. Next slide. And now I'll turn it over to Christopher.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Christopher Mebius, and I'm the Data Acquisition Manager here at CPE. I apologize that our pretty graphic there on the right isn't working. That was unexpected, but that's all right. I wanted to talk a little bit about data acquisition, just to give some transparency around the types of data that we ask for from partnering agencies. Oh, there it goes. We ask for a lot of data from our partnering agencies to ensure that we can do our analyses correctly and as fully as possible. So there on the right side of your screen, now that it's popped in, that's the copy of our data request checklist. So that is all of the data types that we ask our partnering agencies for. There you'll see we ask for vehicle stops, pedestrian stops, use of force, crime, calls for service, and arrests. For each of these data sets, we are really looking for when an incident occurred, where it occurred by street address or coordinates, why it occurred, so why was there a stop, why was there a use of force, what was the reason for search, etc. What occurred during the incident, and then who was involved by demographics, so race, ethnicity, gender, etc. As my team collects this data, we review the data and ask the departments a lot of questions just to ensure that we fully understand what we have in front of us. We'll ask questions like, what does this column represent? What do these values mean? Or what do these values mean? And why are some of the data points missing? And then from there, the data acquisition team does a data gap analysis. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the data gap analysis, I like to think of it as a repeat back. So what we do is we compare the data provided by the sheriff's office to the data that we requested from the agency, just to report back to them, hey, this is how well you were able to meet our request. To be fair, we asked for lots of variables and lots of data sets, and to date, no department has been able to fully meet our request, and that includes the sheriff's office. As we compare the data provided to the data requested, we also determine which research questions will likely be answered based off of the data provided. So we're kind of doing a weather forecast for what we think can be done based off of the quality of the data. Just to give a quick summary of the data gap analysis, or DGA, for the San Diego County Sheriff's Office, we really focused on our primary sets of data that we analyzed for the Justice Navigator. So for traffic stops and non-traffic stops, we were provided with all of the needed variables for analysis, so that was great. The RIPA data, was not separated as vehicle stops and pedestrian stops at the time of collection. However, that's not uncommon for RIPA data, and instead we reviewed the data as traffic stops and non-traffic stops according to the reason for each stop. So just a little tweak that we made there based off of the RIPA data structure. And then finally, when it came to the use of force, all of the required data were provided for all of those analyses, and that was great. The one thing I'll flag here is, because I said a moment ago, no department's able to give us all of the data that we ask for. A lot of the data points that we ask for are obviously used for the Justice Navigator assessment, and then several of the variables that we use are used, de-identified, and in aggregate for research purposes. So although, well, what was great is the San Diego County Sheriff's Office gave us all of the data that we needed in the JNA, which is perfect. We just didn't quite get everything for research purposes, but that's sort of an aside for us. Our primary focus is getting the JNA out. And anyway, that's it for me.
All right, thanks, Christopher. Again, my name is Matthew Graham. I'm the data analyst manager here at CPE, and I'm going to talk through some of our key findings. And just for anyone watching who hasn't had a chance to review this, I'm going to talk through the main findings, but the full report is available at justicenavigator.org if you want to dig a little deeper. So as Chris mentioned, we look into 3 types of data primarily: use of force, traffic stops, and non-traffic stops. We start with a bit of departmental context. So what does the personnel of the Sheriff's Office look like? And we see that about 5.5% of deputies are Black, 32% are Latinx, and 54% are white. And that aligns pretty closely with the demographics of San Diego County's population. That's a good sign. They serve a community of about 3.3 million and employ more than 2,500 deputies. So what did we find? For use of force, our key findings are that Black people were subjected to force 4 times as often as white people. 18% of the people who officers used force on were Black. And the 3 most common types of force used were holds, weapon pointed at subject, and takedown. For traffic stops, we found that once stopped, Black people and Latinx people were searched more often than white people. And in terms of stop reason, Latinx and Black people were stopped more often for equipment failure, such as a broken taillight. So 30% for each of them, compared to 21% of white people stopped for equipment failures. For non-traffic stops or pedestrian stops, after accounting for crime rates, poverty rates, and neighborhood demographics, which I'll discuss a bit more how we do that in a minute, Black people experienced traffic stops 3.5 times as often as white people. And while Black people made up 5% of the population of San Diego County, they made up 11% of traffic stops. So digging a little bit more into those use of force findings. We received data from 2016 through 2019. And as we can see here, not a lot of fluctuation in the number of use of force incidents per year. So just under 3,700 in 2016, around 3,900 in 2018 and 2019. So pretty stable. Looking at who had force used on them, again, 5% of the population of San Diego is Black, and Black people made up 18% of the people that police used force on. Latinx people made up 35% of the population and 32% of the people that officers used force on. And Black people made up white people made up 48% of the population and 44% of the people that officers used force on. We also know that there are a lot of factors that contribute to racial disparities in this country. So when we see findings like this, it's not entirely attributable to the police themselves. And so we try to account for that by controlling for crime rates, poverty rates, and neighborhood demographics. And so these are some of the most common explanations. So, crime rates, like police are going to go where there's more crime. Poverty rates, in neighborhoods with greater poverty, there's a greater need for social services, and a lot of times police are the ones that get those calls. So you're going to have, or you're more likely to have use of force where the police are operating most often. So even accounting for crime rates, poverty rates, and neighborhood demographics, Black people were still subjected to force 4 times as often as white people. And Latinx people were subjected to force at about the same rate as white people, taking into account their share of the population. We can also look at how much those neighborhood factors contribute to differences in use of force rates across neighborhoods. And so we see that 48% of the differences in use of force rates across different neighborhoods is explained by crime rates, poverty rates, and neighborhood demographics. That means that 52% remains unexplained. And there are a lot of other factors that we can't control for that, again, aren't the police. So there's education and housing and all of these societal factors that contribute to racial disparities in this country. So we say that the police own some portion of that 52% that remains unexplained. And we can't really identify what portion because it's such a complicated array of issues, but they own some portion of that. Moving to traffic stops, we received data from the latter half of 2018 through the first half of 2020. And we can see a bit of fluctuation. Each of these bars is 1 quarter. So we see a bit of fluctuation from about 12,000 in Q3 of 2018, the first bar there on the left, down to about 9,000, 9,500 in the first quarter of 2020. And then in the second quarter of 2020, we see this big drop down to about 3,000. And that is likely at least partially due to the COVID lockdown. So, people aren't commuting as much, people aren't going out to dinner or to entertainment. And so there's just less people on the road to be stopped. There may be other factors contributing to this decrease. There may be departmental policies or initiatives that we're not aware of. But our assumption is that at least part of that drop is due to COVID. And that's something we've seen in numerous departments for who we've received 2020 data from. When I showed use of force, I showed you the percent of each racial group that had force used on them compared to their share of the population. We typically don't do that same comparison for traffic stops because we can't be certain to what extent the demographics of people driving through your jurisdiction match the demographics of the people who live in your jurisdiction, right? You have a lot of people who could be driving through, commuting through, what have you. But in the case of San Diego County, we see, for instance, Black people made up about 6% of the people who were pulled over by police. And they make up about 5% of the population. So that's actually fairly comparable. And same for Latinx and white. Latinx make up 35% of the population and 31% of the people pulled over. And white people accounted for 53% of the people pulled over. Looking at search rates, so once stopped, both Black and Latinx people were more likely to be searched than white people. So Latinx people were searched about 40% more often, 1.4 times as often, and Black people were searched 20% more often than white people. On the other hand, Asian people and Middle Eastern people were less likely to be searched. They were searched about 0.3 times often as white people. Despite being searched more, Black and Latinx people were actually less likely to have contraband found on them during those searches. So Black people, who were about 20% more likely to be searched, had contraband found on them 17% of the time. Latinx people had contraband found on them 21% of the time they were searched, compared to white people who had contraband found on them in 29% of searches. So Black and Latinx people searched more often, have contraband found on them less often. So that may indicate that there's not a good reason that they should be being searched more often. Looking at traffic stop outcomes, Latinx people were about 20% more, were arrested about 20% more often than white people, whereas Black people were arrested at about the same rate as white people. But then looking at stops that resulted in no citation or arrest, so they were released with a warning or no action, both Black and Latinx people were quite a bit more likely to be released with no action taken against them. So Black people in 55% of stops and Latinx people in 50% of stops were released with no citation or arrest, compared to 40% of stops of white people. So this could indicate that Black and Latinx people are being pulled over, with less of a strong justification for doing so. And finally, turning to non-traffic or pedestrian stops, we had the same time window as the traffic stops, so the latter half of 2018 through the first half of 2020. Over that first year and a half, we see a pretty steady decrease from about 8,000 stops in Q3 of 2018 down to about 4,500 in Q3 of 2019. So pretty steadily decreasing there. And even when it does jump back up a little in Q4 of 2019, it's still lower than those first 3 quarters of data that we received. And then again, we see the substantial drop in Q2 of 2020, which we again assume is at least partially driven by COVID lockdown. Looking at the Percentage of stops by racial group. Again, Black people make up 5% of the population. They made up 11% of non-traffic stops during this time period. Whereas Latinx people make up 35% of the population and 30% of stops. White people made up 48% of the population and 55% of stops. And then controlling for crime rates, poverty rates, and demographics, as we did with use of force. Controlling for all those factors, we see that Black people are stopped 3.5 times as often as white people, whereas Latinx people were stopped at about the same rate, taking into account their share of the population. Looking at what percent of the difference in stop rates across neighborhoods is explained by those factors, crime, poverty, and demographics, we see about 1/3 is explained, 1/3 of that difference in stop rates between neighborhoods is explained by these other community factors. That leaves 2/3 unexplained. And again, we assert that some portion of that 67% is owned by the police. Though there are other social factors that contribute to it as well. And now I will turn it over to Jyoti to walk you through Justice Navigator resources.
Thank you, Matt. Again, I'm Jyoti Cheng. I am a community engagement coordinator here at the Center for Policing Equity. I just wanted to briefly highlight some of the tools and resources that are available alongside our assessments on the Justice Navigator platform. The next slide, please. So if you're interested in learning more about policing data, we provide some tips. We have a deeper dive into policing data and the data analysis process in general. That includes a glossary of key terms that breaks down some of the jargon used by folks in this field. So if you want to learn more about what an regression analysis means or what departments mean by contraband, we have a glossary that breaks down some of those terms. We also have a very helpful video that walks through a sample Justice Navigator assessment to help you understand the different types of analyses we conduct and what they mean. We also have guidelines on how to find, understand, and analyze policing data, even if your department does not currently have a Justice Navigator assessment. Next slide, please. We also have some background for folks who are just looking to get a basic understanding of policing in America. That includes a brief overview of the origins and history of policing in this country, the types of law enforcement agencies that typically operate in your area, and the work they do and personnel involved. Next slide, please. And all this is meant to help community members take action to shape the models of public safety that they would like to see. We have guidelines to improve the collection and reporting of policing data, understanding that detailed and comprehensive data is vital to holding law enforcement accountable. We also have tips to ensure that strong and clear regulations are placed on law enforcement in 2 ways: strengthening written policy and improving their accountability mechanisms. And next slide, please. Finally, we also have guidance on how to structure conversations and strategies around the redesign of public safety broadly. Our roadmap for exploring new models of funding public safety covers topics such as reducing the footprint of law enforcement and bolstering other resources and services in communities that have been traditionally and historically underserved and underinvested. And again, all this information is available on the Justice Navigator website, justicenavigator.org, and at our home website, policingequity.org. I'd also like to invite you all to a town hall we're hosting with the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego and the North County Equity and Justice Coalition to again discuss our report and hear from community members on the public safety solutions that they want to see. That event will take place on the 28th, and you'll be able to find all that information on social media shortly. And with that, I want to thank you all for your time and open it up for questions.
Thank you so much for your very detailed presentation. I am sure that community members have a lot of questions that they would like to share with you. But before we go into our Q&A session, we would like to hear from community members that have either turned in comments, raised their hands, or have already notified us ahead of this meeting that they would very much like to speak. With that being said, I would like to call on our first speaker, which is Dr. Alan Mobley. Do we have a Dr. Alan Mobley with us tonight?
Ms. Domingos, I am looking for Dr. Mobley, and I don't see that he is logged in as an attendee.
Okay, with that being said, then we will move on to our next speaker, which is Reverend Shane Harris. And then I'll pass it on to Mr. Parker. We're going to be alternating the speakers.
And bear with me for 1 second while I get Mr. Reverend Harris. Hold on 1 second, please. Reverend Harris, are you there? We can see your picture. We cannot hear you or see your video.
Hello?
Reverend Harris, we can see you. We cannot see your video. We can hear you though, and having an issue getting video on. Can you do that? Not.
I think you have to do it on your side.
Well, it looks as if you may have to do it on your side. I don't have the capability, it looks like, to turn a video on. Usually the attendee will do so, is what I'm being told. And at this point, it looks like IT is saying that it is somehow been turned off. So our apologies, Reverend Harris.
No problem. Thank you. First and foremost, I want to thank the Center for Police and Equity on this really strong study, and for the many advocates and activists who work to push for this, as well as the CLERB board members who supported this very critical study. I think it's pretty clear that the study is identifying something we already knew, which is that there is a great disparity when it comes to how African Americans and Latinos are treated in pertaining to stops and other measures of policing in San Diego County versus other races. And I think that the discussion that is happening tonight offers an opportunity to address real change. As CLERB is listening and discussing strategies, I think we have a number of opportunities here. It's very clear that African Americans, although among the highest that are stopped by race, it is very clear African Americans are also the highest in not having contraband, and it's very then making it even more evident that there is a great disparity there that I would argue would be because of a lack of racial and cultural competency. But then we have, clearly a number of other data points that shows the significance of how African Americans are treated. And here's what I believe. I mean, the reality is that George Floyd was killed. It always starts with a stop. It always starts with a stop. And I believe that if we address the issue at the root, at the core root, and I think it's got to be how police come into our communities, how they view our communities, and how they address an equitable stance of community policing across the county. This data is really a mirror data to the city of San Diego's study, which was conducted by San Diego State University, that showed Blacks, African Americans pulled over at higher rates, but have less of the contraband. So this is evident. I think that the analysis calls for real action. The Sheriff's Department touts of the changes that they have made, whether you're talking about ending no-knock warrants on the countywide level, or whether you're talking about the commitment to racial equity. I have read the study, the response that the Sheriff's Department had to this study, and it is very clear that while the Sheriff's Department touts of a real strong stance on racial equity, you don't see a lot of measures pertaining to how they're going to do this. And I think equity is identified by data, science, as it was mentioned, but it's identified by action, policy. And so my recommendation based on this study tonight to the CLERB board is to review the PROTECT ordinance. This ordinance is being reviewed currently within the city of San Diego's Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods Committee. And it is something that is being looked at as a real model for modern day policing in America, really. It is very, clear we have an opportunity here to do something. And I think that the opportunity should rest upon how we look at real policy change. The Protect Ordinance or the Protect campaign here which is happening at the city level, has really has a focus on seeking to address invasive policing practices used disproportionately to stop, search, and interrogate people from Black, Latino, Asian, and Pacific Islander communities, the LGBTQ community, people with disabilities, and people from other marginalized communities. And so Protect will require San Diego police to have probable cause in order to stop, ask for identification, question, and or search an individual. The ordinance will also help to limit stops for equipment violations. I believe at my core that the real changes are within policy. And so I'm asking the CLERB board from this town hall to review the Protect Ordinance. You can find more information out at cpatsd.com. That's cpatsd.com. And I think a discussion on your agenda in one of your future meetings would pivot the opportunity for possible looking at how to address the stops. I think the stops are at the core, the very concern we should have, because everything starts with a stop. The killings have started with a stop. The mistakes have started with a stop. Everything that has been seen in this country pertaining to policing has started with a stop. So we have to get to the root of this problem. And I think certainly it would be addressing the stop. So I hope that the CLERB board will review the Protect Ordinance, have a discussion on it, and possibly look into recommending that the Board of Supervisors bring forth a motion and look at adopting this on a countywide level. But I think certainly the Protect Ordinance would put us in a different position pertaining to stops. There's a lot of fear mongering about what this kind of policing would be. Oh, people will get to rob and steal, and people will get to do all kinds of things. And I know that the opposing side has a lot to say about crime going up. But we can address crime and address safety among residents, police, and community altogether if we look at policing from an equity standpoint and ensuring that we are bringing humanity into our community policing, into our community conversations about policing. And I think humanity starts with how someone is stopped, what reason they're stopped for. And I think police, particularly our sheriffs, have to know that if they stop someone, that they have to have probable cause. And I think that's really got to be the hope. So I hope that this board will review in one of your upcoming meetings the Protect Ordinance, just as the city of San Diego. And I'll make sure that we get some information to Paul and your board quickly on this.
Thank you, Reverend Harris. Thank you. Next, we will go to Marissa Martin from San Diegans for Justice. Just bear with me for a second here. Marissa, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and your time to address the town hall starts now.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And thank you, CPE, for your report. I will be brief, as much of my sentiments echo Reverend Harris's. I think we have seen a lot of data. We have been inundated with data, and as he mentioned, the data continues to confirm what community members have been complaining about for years and years and years. And it's beyond overdue time for action. The county really needs to engage in solutions. The sheriff's department needs to engage in solutions. And we've kind of seen piecemeal recommendations and piecemeal changes, but we really need to really address this holistically. I think we need to start with the root cause. The Protect Ordinance is a great ordinance to start with at the city level and kind of adopt that for the county. I think that's a great suggestion. I just will also add that San Diegans for Justice is really really concerned with this. We have been looking into this for years. We will be bringing a kind of separate but tangentially related report next week that we will be making public, as we have hired the top expert in the country to kind of do an assessment on solutions, not just bringing the data, but actually bringing some solutions that we could present. And we look forward to working with the Board of Supervisors, and we've been working with you, Paul. So we look forward to working with the rest of CLERB in bringing those solutions to the forefront and really helping the county take action, because it's long overdue. And this is what we've been hearing the community talk about over and over and over again. And I think the community is tired of the data, because we keep seeing the same thing, and all the data confirms that Black and brown people are treated differently. And we have to change that. So thank you. I will stop there, but thank you for allowing me the chance to speak.
And thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisa from San Diegans for Justice, and to all who have spoken so far. Thank you so much for your comments. Again, we would like to remind everybody attending that we're going to hear first from speakers, and those who are, Paul is going to read those who have sent in their comments, and then we're going to open it up for questions as we move along. Our next speaker is Dave Myers. You may unmute yourself, Mr. Myers, if you're here.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Dave Myers, lifelong resident of San Diego County. I did 33 years in the San Diego Sheriff's Department. In full disclosure, I am running for sheriff, and I echo some of the previous callers that community members are upset. They have been upset for years. It is kind of disappointing that CLERB finally, not the current board members, but CLERB finally has taken up the issue after a San Diego State University study, after a Union Tribune study, after an ACLU study, Campaign Zero study on the same data. And what we've heard time and time and time again from the San Diego Sheriff's Department and the current acting sheriff, who's been in charge since 2016 to 2020 of that data, is denials, is that the data is wrong, that the Center for Policing Studies is wrong. Matter of fact, one of the solutions that the Sheriff's Department put forward in response to the CPE study was that they have a critical incident review board in a division of inspectional services. As we've known from the state audit on jail deaths, it specifically mentions that the focus of the Critical Incident Review Board is protecting the department's liability, not creating solutions. That it fails to consistently take meaningful action in response to use of force incidents. I was kind of disappointed that I didn't see tonight talk about the Native American component within CPE, and that San Diego County has the highest number of Native American tribal governments, which are in San Diego County. And I'm really tired of the excuses from the San Diego Sheriff's Department that they embrace change, that they're committed to providing services, when we see time and time and time again, nothing but lies, denials, and they're attacking the data. I appreciate the historic work of CPE and what you're trying to bring forward in communities to make them safer, better, and more inclusive, and law enforcement must change, and community-based organizations must be involved in the conversations about ongoing robust data analysis of stop data, of use of force data. I'd be interested too if the CPE folks could talk about if the use of force data included what happened in the jail settings. Thank you for your work.
And thank you. Next up will be Ashley Luna. Ashley Luna, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Your time to address the town hall starts now.
Okay, hi. So my name is Ashley. I primarily was always a liberal leaning person, and always supported the idea of police reform. When George Floyd died, I assumed it was because of racism, just like anyone else. I'm going to try to be quick, as quick as I can. I started to hear from the other side of people saying that sometimes the media exaggerates the degree of racism in the police force and the degree of police brutality. And so I started to look into that, and I realized that part of those claims is true. So where I'm coming from is that I start off, I'm more skeptical now. So please bear with me. I know it's annoying, but I decided just to stop assuming that what I hear is right and just try to be skeptical and critical. So bear with me. I'm hearing some comments that people have made. For example, we've got to get to the root of this issue. And my question, question is, rhetorical question is it really fair if we only concentrate on one root of the problem, whereas when we try to talk about other coexisting roots of the problem, coexisting problems that affect many people, including myself as a single mom, I sometimes feel like when we concentrate on one root of the problem, we kind of make the other problems feel invisible. As someone also mentioned, we need real changes with policy. And I also ask, is it fair if we're only concentrating on certain kinds of policies, yet we don't put on the table other kinds of policies that might also be helpful in addressing all these different coexisting issues of the problem. I'm influenced a little bit by Heather McDonald, who is a policing expert. So sometimes I use kind of her way of thinking when I look at the data. Anyways, in your report, you said that 18% of all use of force incidents were against Black people, even though Blacks were about 5% of the population. And you also said that neighborhood crime rates only counted for half. I personally am a little bit clear with what your statistical analysis or how that worked, that formula. One way that Heather McDonald looks at it is, one very simple way is, instead of comparing that statistic to their share of the population, you compare that statistic to their share of the crime. Now, I'm aware that there's so many different issues that contribute to a higher incidence of Black people being the criminals. For example, they experience 2.5 times worth more poverty. Also coming from a single mother, I'm a single mom, that can help increase the risks. Sorry, this sounded a lot more eloquent when I wrote down my notes. As well as schools, our education system is absolutely failing Black children. It's failing low-income children and children of single families, and the education system, the failures of the education system definitely can have a lifetime impact. Now, that said, when we do get to crime rates, when you see that 24% of all homicides, 24% of all rapes, 39% of all robberies, and 21% of aggravated assaults, one would think that perhaps the rate of force would be close to that, but instead it is not. It is actually, if you're going to say 18%, then one could actually say that, well, actually, Black people are underrepresented in the use of force incidents as opposed to their share of the crime. Also, there are many other things that aren't obvious that were not mentioned in your speech that can make someone who happens to be Black more likely to have a use of force incident. I just want to say that some of the reasons why I say these things is because I did go increasingly concerned about some of the protest violence And I really believe that it's really important to try to be as accurate as we can with information, because sometimes people, it's just a fact that according to surveys, people who are more left-leaning have a much higher overestimation of the impact of police violence on the Black community. So I feel like we should be as accurate as we can. That's the best thing for everyone, as well as trying to think of all the coexisting forces.
And Ms. Luna, your time is up. Thank you. Next, we will go to, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mingos.
I just wanted to say to Ms. Ashley Luna, when you're speaking your truth and your mind, please, there is no need to apologize. I know the CLERB has a certain reputation. We now have a new board, and our goal is to pay more attention to community and actually listen to voices. I mean, it would be, I cannot tell you this is a safe space. I cannot reassure you. The last thing I want to do is false reassurance. But I just wanted to say there's no need to apologize. I don't think anybody's offended by your comments or annoyed by everything you had to share with us. And thank you for having the courage to speak. Our next speaker is Erin, and forgive me if I mispronounce your last name, Nieves or Nevis, I'm not sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Nieves. So you said it right the first time.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so my name is Erin Nieves. I'm with Alliance San Diego, a community empowerment organization working to ensure all San Diegans can live a life to their fullest potential. And I'm also a member of the Coalition for Police Accountability and Transparency. So we're here today to address the disparities found in the Center on Policing Equity's recent released report of the San Diego Sheriff's Department STOP data. Unfortunately, the disparities are strikingly similar to previous reports done in our region. As the data has shown time and time again, Black and Brown communities are over-policed and regarded differently than white communities. As an example of this in the CPE report, it was concluded that Black people were subjected to force 4 times as often as white people, and 52% of the time was not explained by existential factors like neighborhood crime rates or poverty. So you can understand how disheartening it is to read a statement released by the Sheriff's Department attempting to explain away these disparities. It is far beyond the time to address the findings in these reports and others like it, and not just create a list of action, but create an actual plan of action. Thank you.
And thank you. Next up, we will go to Ted Womack.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. My name is Ted Womack. I'm also with Alliance San Diego, and I'll keep mine brief. This CPE yielded results that I expected based on the experiences community members continuously share about their police interaction. Black and Brown communities continue to be the most impacted communities in these reports about policing in San Diego, and it's not a coincidence. This is a pattern of behavior. And the rates of force used against Black people shown in the CPE report doesn't correlate with how small of a population that we make up in this city. And just to go on, the sheriff's response to these findings, to me, blatantly ignores that and doesn't address the truths that community members experience every day, not just here in San Diego, but all over the country. And it makes me ask, like, don't Black and Brown people deserve to be protected and served at the highest standards? And that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Womack. And next up, we have Ilka, and this person would like to identify as she, her, hers. So if we have Ilka here with us, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for your report. I will tell you it was disheartening to say the least, but sadly also expected to find out those results. And now what we need to really think about is, I'm not going to repeat what you all brought up. I was really impressed other people were on top of that. However, we need to get to the root of the issue, and we need to find out also in the audit of the jails, as both our future sheriff, hopefully, David Myers, and Reverend Shane Harris have requested, to release the data from the deaths in the jails, which was a absolutely, sickening, upsetting amount, and know their color of their skin, the age, if they are female or male. The other thing I want to bring up, we need to take a strong stance when this comes to a point. It is the root, usually the leadership, and we have none. Our sheriff and our undersheriff are 100% responsible for this. So we need to fight together on getting a strong leadership, getting better education for our deputies, getting, psych evaluations on our deputies, getting, counseling with our deputies, because honestly, if we can take a deputy off the street before they commit such an action, and they are having this tunnel vision and this behavior of profiling where the cases clearly showed they weren't doing very well, and they were obviously unaware that, you don't just pull somebody over because of the color of their skin. I want to echo in the words of Reverend Shane Harris, as well as the future Sheriff David Myers. Protect is an amazing group. I am so amazed with what they're creating. I really encourage you to evaluate it, and hopefully we can all work together. I am 100% always available to volunteer, to work, to gather information, because as a delegate of the state and an alternate for the county, and being so severely concerned about how this is affecting people's families and their children when they get pulled over, pulled into jail for no reason, and just released. And on the issue of the deaths in the jails, why? Why are human lives being treated so poorly? Why is it that we had a sheriff that could retire without criminal charges for what he is ultimately responsible for, as is Kelly Martinez, the undersheriff? I want to thank you for allowing me to speak. Obviously, you can tell this is something near and dear to me because it shouldn't be happening. This is 2022, and it's horrific that this is what we're hearing still today. It hasn't gone away, and I know we can do better. And thank you very much, all of you on the panel and from CLERB. I look forward to seeing more reports, and I will be checking in and being part of the action. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we go to Dr. R. Lee Brown. Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown, are you there? Dr. Brown, we see you're on mute. Ms. Domingos, perhaps you should go to the next speaker, and we'll try to work on Dr. Brown afterwards.
Very well. Our next speaker is Yusuf Miller to address, to speak at the town hall now. Mr. Miller, if you're with us, please go ahead. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Hello, my name is Yusuf Miller. I'm with the North County Equity and Justice Coalition and the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego. A lot of my allies and colleagues have really did a very outstanding job laying out what we as a community is looking for and activists are looking for. And what I want to say, instead of going over that, what they already mentioned, like I will echo protect, but what we need from the CLERB is an allyship that can function, something that has teeth, something that has power, something that has get up and go. This is the latest of many reports that we've had throughout San Diego, and the community and the activist organizations are simply frustrated, and we're looking for an ally that can get moving on making some of these changes, to reach out intentionally to the Board of Supervisors and demand change, not simply ask now do me a favor, but fight for our people, fight for the community. We've been seeing this go on for decades, and this is nothing new. It surprises absolutely no one in the community. So please be that ally, be that person, that organization that stands up and goes for justice and changing in policy that may save lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Parker, you want to go back and see if we have Dr. Brown available to speak now?
Sure, Ms. Domingos. Dr. Brown, are you there? Dr. Brown, we can see that you're there, but you are muted. Okay, Ms. Domingos, perhaps I should read the next two comments that we have into the record. Is that appropriate?
Please go ahead. Please read those comments, and then we will, if we do not have any questions or anybody that would like to speak, we would just like to hear from fellow board members if they would like to speak.
Ms. Domingos, I see that Dr. Fishman has requested to speak.
Very well, but that will happen after the comments.
Very well. Please allow me to read these comments. Thank you. First, from Kurt Watson. Kurt Watson, a resident of Carlsbad. Every activity of every law enforcement officer should be logged and made available for free for the public to review. Additionally, all dash cam and body cam footage should be proactively reviewed by someone not at all related to the department to observe all actions taken by deputies. And then our final comment to be read into the record is from Tom Packard, a resident of Encinitas. I most strongly encourage the CLERB to not let the sheriff once again get away with dismissing information, criticizing analysis methods, and offering general platitudes regarding studies, including the Center for Policing Equity report. Please insist that the new temporary department leadership replace past sheriff responses with acknowledgement rather than denial of the serious problems and challenges facing the department and assertive action to get the sheriff to correct problems. Thanks to CLERB members for your recent, more proactive work on systemic change. In particular, thanks to Paul Parker for his leadership and proactive management. Tom Packard, showing up for racial justice, North County. Mr. Domingos, that concludes the comments to be read into the record.
Thank you so much, Mr. Parker. At this juncture, we will go to our last public comment for the evening, which is Dr. Darwin Fishman. If you are there, Dr. Fishman, you may go ahead.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Darwin Fishman, Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego and North County Equity and Justice Coalition. Thank you, and I know I'm not planning to speak. I know I speak at CLERB meetings on a regular basis, but I did want to do the personal part. Maybe this is appropriate enough to end, which is since I've sort of been in your seat before, but on the city level of the CRB, and I've looked at cases, complaints where I felt there was racial profiling involved. And of course, I've quite often literally been the minority. People did not agree with me when I said that there was racial profiling and the complaint was legitimate and has to be sustained. So, and I know how difficult it is, not just being the only Black man when I was on the CRB, but trying to make that case that actually there is racial bias with this. And I actually, that's why I'm speaking. I was struck that no one said that in the sense that technically for CLERB responsibility, is you've got a disconnect. One level, the report shows that racial profiling, or whatever you want to call it, is alive and well. Black and brown folks were clearly being targeted by police disproportionately. But on the other hand, for the civilian oversight of police, law enforcement for the county, it's not exactly like you guys have a stellar record of dinging sheriff departments for racial profiling, saying, yes, this did really happen. And the truth is, of course, it's extremely difficult to do that. One, for someone to speak out and say that, and two, to actually get a majority vote to sustain that. Whether you do this in a public forum, you do it privately, but you're going to need to go down that path, because this report obviously shows there's a disconnect between your work, what you guys are doing, and what actually exists. And my guess is this course is as much worse than even this report suggesting. And for that matter, the multiple reports. I remember when Dr. Weber was fighting for the whole part about when the police pull people over, it can't just be that you get the demographic information. If you give them a citation or they're arrested, every time you're pulled over by law enforcement, you need to include the demographic information. And ding, ding, surprise, from a community standpoint, we weren't shocked to find That's where the real racial profiling is at. It's this regular stops where there's not necessarily a citation or arrest made. And that's the part also that we tend to complain about. And I've seen it, I've seen the complaints, and I understand how difficult that is. One of the things that you're going to have to do then, of course, then is not only find a way to figure out whether or not these complaints, you sustain them, especially ones in terms where people are talking about discrimination, but also the other part, which has been discussed tonight about, is there things that can be done within the Sheriff's Department that you can advocate for that would help to reduce the amount of complaints that are produced in this area, especially since, again, and this was also not referenced tonight, it does also look like the Sheriff's Department in that sense is worse than the San Diego Police Department, City of San Diego, which is, at the end of the day, there does need to be a discussion because there are some law enforcement, and this is actually where CPE can really be helpful for us because they do this research all over the country. There are some police departments that actually do a better job at this. They actually reduce their rates of racial profiling and complaints, and it's not smoke and mirrors. It's not rhetoric. It's substantiated by the community will vouch for it and say that there has been a difference that's made. And I know San Diego, we're capable of doing that. And in that sense, I think part of the open question I would say in terms of hopefully for us continuing to work with CPE would be is, are there things that in the research that you've done in other cities and the work that you've done with other law enforcement, are there things that they've done, best practices that have been substantial and reduced the rates? And also, how do you evaluate that? So again, it doesn't feel like it's just a press release from the Sheriff's Department saying it's all good, we're following what's been said, but we can actually show there's been a substantial difference in the way that policing is conducting here. And we can actually see less of what the data is showing for racial profiling and less complaints from the community. So thank you for your work. And I think this is a great first step. And I'm looking for many more steps, including our RJC and EGC town hall on Monday next week. Thank you. And we'll continue to work with CLERB when we can. And then, you know, even if we're having separate forums, we're still focused on the same goal. We want to reduce the racial profiling, reduce the complaints, and find more effective ways for us to intervene and help out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fishman. Mr. Parker?
Mr. Mingos, it looks like Dr. Brown may be available. Is that permissible?
Okay, please go ahead.
Dr. Brown, are you there? Dr. Brown, you are unmuted. Are you there? One final call for Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown. Mr. Mingos, apparently there's some issues with Dr. Brown's connectivity or whatnot, so I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you to everybody who has spoken, and thank you to folks who have showed up today to this town hall, or should I better say, this special meeting called by the CLERB. As we mentioned in the beginning, it's the first ever where the CLERB has taken it upon themselves to have an ad hoc committee that actually validates that there is racial profiling and there is racial inequities. And we are very grateful for folks that have shown up today and that have spoken, and also for CLERB board members that have taken time out to attend this meeting. And at this point, I'm inviting all CLERB board members that would like to speak or say, share anything with folks that have shown up, and especially those who have had the courage to speak up tonight. So at this point, please go ahead and speak. Yes, Mr. Ware, my co-chair.
Good evening. First of all, CP, thank you guys for an excellent report. We really appreciate it. And I want to give a shout out to my CLERB board members. Very proud of us, proud of you for the courage and the focus that we've had in this process. I'm looking forward to continue to do some great work to change this. I have a question was brought up by one of the speakers. And the information, the past reports we've seen and heard, a lot of the same information as they mentioned. But for CPE, if you guys can share, because you work with organizations all around the country, if you can share, maybe not right now, but I would be interested in hearing the information you have that other jurisdictions have applied in their departments and have changed the actual work or the racial disparity that they've seen in their departments. Is there a blueprint or something out there that we could follow to apply here in San Diego? Obviously, we have our own issues, our own ways, but I'm sure there's something out there that we can follow. And I would like to hear something like that or see something like that. And thank you very much. Your words came alive today from your report, and you did without any kind of emotion, just sharing the information as it appeared in the report. And it was very, very powerful. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ware, would you like a brief answer to, or a thought on that? I think the best thing that CP can offer is to very much let the San Diego community know that every community brings its own uniqueness, so to speak. And San Diego County is no different from the population that is there, from the industry that is there, from the location that you are in the country. And we find that with many of the organizations, the law enforcement agencies, and the communities that we partner with across the country. And I would tell you that this is such a new concept. And really, we all know that the change was really pushed forward for all the right reasons, but for the sadness of the murder of George Floyd. And so everyone, every community that we're working with is asking your same question: is there a blueprint? And because of the uniqueness of every community, there is no solid blueprint. What we advocate for is that the community's voice, which is what is happening here tonight, is actually heard by our law enforcement partners, because the best people that can advocate for change and build their own blueprint will be the community, working with the government organization, working with the law enforcement organization and other stakeholders to build your own blueprint. Now, we can give guidelines, and the Justice Navigator Assessment actually has a worksheet that the Sheriff's Department could work through, or any agency that is partnering with us, to look at the data and look at possibilities that are out there. But there's no magic shaking of a wand on this one, because it is so new. So what we are advocating for is doing just what you're doing now. Listen to the voice of the community, write down those thoughts and ideas, educate the community as best you can, along with educating the law enforcement partner that is in that community the best you can, and trying to bring everyone to the table to come up with joint solutions. That's how this will be done, joint solutions. And yes, we do know that everyone's going to have to be pushed a little out of their comfort zone to make this happen. And again, very brief thought on your question, but I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. You know, I know what the blueprint is. The blueprint is the sin of racism that we have to erase. That's the blueprint right there. I understand that piece, but if there's something else we can do. So thank you for your comments. I just want to share real quick also, I was contacted by Reverend Brown, Dr. Brown. And the question he has, he said he's muted. He was trying to speak, but he's muted. The question he has is, will CPE allow us to review their methodology? That's the question that he had.
I think I can speak to a little bit. And so, first of all, you know, on your question, Janie is absolutely right. The community should be driving the process. But just, you know, she alluded to some resources on the Justice Navigator website, and we do have documentation there on how to strengthen written policies. You know, if the community is interested in like law enforcement redesign, and you know, bringing in other types of responders, we have resources on that. So I definitely want to direct you to look into those resources as well. Regarding his question on the methodology, Dr. Brown's question, We also have some resources on the methodology on the Justice Navigator as well. So there is a methodology page that describes our methodology in some detail. Also, every figure that we show in the Justice Navigator has a little icon below it that says more information. And if you click on that, it'll drop down and it'll explain what data did we use, how did we use it, how did we calculate these numbers. So there's a lot of information in the Justice Navigator itself. And if there's questions beyond that, we would welcome those questions. We'd be happy to answer them. We definitely want to be as transparent as possible. Yeah.
All right. If that has addressed all of Mr. Ware's questions, I would like to hear now from next on stack is Pastor Spriggs. Pastor?
Yes, hi, thank you. I enjoyed everything I was listening to, but I did have a question. Why were the Latinos referred to as Latinx? And you might have stated it earlier on and I just some kind of way missed it, but if you can elaborate on that for me.
We have an internal scholar who has put together basically an internal guide for how to speak about different racial groups and race in general. And the guidance, the leading guidance that we've found is that is the most readily, generalizable, applicable term to refer to the Latino, Latina, Hispanic community. We don't want to impose that label on people who don't identify with it, people who maybe refer to themselves as Hispanic. We don't want to try to undermine that. But we do these reports for dozens of cities. We have to have some generalizable term just to make things scalable, right? And that's the one that we landed on.
All right, so at this point, I was informed by Mr. Parker that we have Reverend Shane Harris who has a question, and then if it's okay with our board members, I would like to continue with Ms. Pintar. But to that comment, if I may, of why the X is used, I'm not sure, I might be putting you on the spot and I must apologize, Ms. Kinayu. Why the X is used. I know another reason why the X is used, and I don't know if you want to speak to that or because I don't want to take up that space.
Thank you. Latin is used in place of Hispanic because many people that come from the countries in Latin America do not identify with their colonized origins. So that's why we use Latin, but because Latino and Latina are gendered, we use Latinx. Of course, it is up to the person. We never force that upon anybody. Latinx is deeply inclusive and allows to represent as many people in our spectrum as possible.
Thank you so much. Back to you, Mr. Parker.
We're going to go to Reverend Harris if he is there. Reverend Harris, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Reverend Harris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I know that I had the opportunity to speak earlier, but I did want to share some of the sort of input that me and my organization, the People's Association of Justice Advocates, will be making in a letter just to really outline some of the requests that I have. One, we think that it's really important that CLERB conduct a longitudinal review of the sheriff's response to the CPE report, which could essentially be a compare and contrast to other national best practices. So I asked that CLERB would conduct a longitudinal study, which is usually a longer study, that can look at the analysis of CPE, what they come back as national best practices, in curbing some of this data and looking at policy change, and then comparing that to the sheriff's report. And the reason why I think that that's important, the sheriff's response to the CPE report, in my perspective, was very vague. In our perspective, was very was a drought of leadership. It didn't really go into depth on what the commitment exactly did to racial equity. It just said, as the sheriff's department, we commit to that. So I asked for a longitudinal review. Two, I think that it's important that CLERB place a discussion on one of its upcoming meeting agendas in the future to discuss the Protect Ordinance. I think a discussion about this would be extremely pivotal. I mentioned that earlier. And then the last thing that the People's Association of Justice Advocates and I are requesting is that CLERB organize its own materials for these events. I talked to Mr. Parker about this event and the way it was promoted. I certainly think that CLERB could use, as other commissions and other committees at the county level have been able to, a stronger promotion and platform to get more community input, especially during discussions like this. The county communication system is just merely not enough, nor is it a draw for people, everyday people, to attend this meeting. So I think some more very strong, nice materials, possibly even a little bit of investment of dollars in promoting these kind of town halls, especially when town halls are happening, could allow for a broader community input and really stronger community partnership. I just wanted to share those last things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Mingus, I believe we have Ms. Pintar that was next, ma'am.
Yes, we do. And then we have other folks that would like to speak, and then I'll let Mr. Parker, introduce those folks.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to, a few things. I wanted to first thank the members of our board that served on the ad hoc committee that put together this town hall, for the extra work and hours that you put in to organize this and make sure that it was well attended. And I wanted to thank CPE for their presentation tonight. I really do want to hear more, and I have looked at your website, and I am going to look at the Protect Ordinance that Reverend Harris mentioned, but I would like to hear more about potential solutions. I know that we hear a lot of times that one of the answers, it's definitely not the only answer, we need stronger policies in place, but one of the answers is training. But I'd like to see solutions that bring us to an outcome. So it's one thing to say we're going to provide additional training. I think it's another thing to say we're going to look for a particular outcome at the end of that training. So how are we tracking the data and seeing that, if what we're doing is making a difference? And I would just ask the folks from CPE to comment on maybe some of their work in other jurisdictions where they have seen solutions put in place, track the data, if that, in fact, you've done that, to see what the end result was.
I don't think that we have done anything specific in tracking data with some various new solutions. And it goes back to what I said earlier, in that the changes that are being asked for by community are so new, and their voice now is so strong that it's going to take time to determine what data should be collected, how long should that data be collected. As we saw with our Justice Navigator assessment, there are certain data points that we asked for that agencies weren't able to give us. So there's going to need to be improvement in that area. And in general, when you put all that together, the solutions are coming, and I know they're going to come, but it is going to take time. And I know that's been a tough thing to have to embrace, because that's all that our communities have been doing over a long period, is being told it's going to take time, it's going to take time. I think you'll find some of the best future solutions will be looking at when we talked about, let's say 48% or whatever the exact numbers were in the San Diego report, could be explained by crime, poverty, and neighborhood demographics, but there was 50-some% that could not. And it's that 50-some% that needs to be focused on. And we're hearing from across the country, if nothing else, that these are the out-of-box ideas. And it really comes down to what should a police sheriff's department be handling as far as calls and complaints? And what should they not be handling because they don't have the specific training? The one thing that I've seen in San Diego County that for me personally has been very impressive, but I do know that they looked at a program called Cahoots for one of the programs here in Oregon, which is where I'm based. And that's their crisis stabilization centers. And my understanding is that they're staffed 24 hours a day and that the county is looking to put more of them out there, and I think already have. When you look at something like that, that solution did not come from the sheriff's department. The sheriff's department was part of a collaborative effort with health officials, education officials, social service officials. And that's how, my understanding, that's how that was built. And I think that's a positive step in the future for what, when you're talking solutions for what they should look like. It comes from collaboration and allowing many people outside of just law enforcement to come up with their ideas and how do you build it out. And that's what we're looking for. So if nothing else, I think those crisis stabilization units are going to show to be when they've been in working long enough to have data, you know, we should always be basing everything on the data. But you have to know what you're looking for the outcome in order to know the data points that you're hoping to collect. So in general, it's starting, Ms. Pintar, but there is a long ways to go. But the best part for me to tell you is that it started. And it started by, again, having the voice of many different people and communities heard in order to help build out those solutions.
I'm glad that you mentioned the mental health crisis teams. The County of San Diego has launched a more robust program like this. And one of the things I would like to see at a future CLERB meeting, Mr. Parker, and if my fellow board members agree, is a discussion of how the county's mental health crisis team is interacting with the sheriff's department, how they're deciding who goes to what calls. That's one thing I would like to hear more about and learn more about. The other thing I just wanted to say in response to all of the people that have spoken tonight, thank you again for participating. And just for those who, I know a lot of you that are here tonight, we see you every month being a part of this discussion, and some of the names tonight are newer. You know, we haven't seen you more recently, but I just wanted to remind you that this CLERB did ask for the sheriff to respond back to the CPE report with a report, not just a response to the report as in, you know, how they feel about the data, but what they're going to do in response to make a positive change to correct these disparities. And I believe that we're going to hear that report, Mr. Parker, at our March meeting. Is that correct?
Ms. Pintar, that's when we've asked, we gave them 60 days or to present something for us at the March meeting. And
Okay.
that's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Minkos, would you like me to go to, I see that Ms. Keen Ayub, but we also have looks like we have 4 public members who had raised their hands for the last 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot see Ms. Keen Ayub's hand, but if it's okay with the public, since they have already spoken and Ms. Ayub hasn't spoken, Keen Ayub, she can go ahead and then we'll go back to the public.
Ms. Keen Ayub, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I wanted to thank everybody that attended tonight. I wanted to pick out a particular comment that was made by Ms. Ilka Weston that directed regarding the report on how we can utilize the information that we received to process and keep certain officers that demonstrate biases from remaining out in the field. It's something that I think that we should all be considering when we look at the reports anyways, which ones continuously come up. But obviously we saw with the reports with traffic stops, if it's pertaining to certain officers that are making these traffic stops continuously where they're stopping Black and brown people and then letting them go, or is it something that we would even have authorization over to look at in terms of numbers?
Mr. Parker?
Yes, Ms. Kinayoub, it's a great question, and it's something that we're working. I think that we started looking at how to investigate racial disparities. I think we all may recall we put that on the board agenda, I think back in October and November. And one of the pieces of information that we thought we would be able to look at to weigh what evidence is there and what's not, because as was previously mentioned, it's hard to prove racial discrimination unless there's an overt comment or action, something extremely egregious. So we were looking at obtaining the RIPA data ourselves, and we're still in the process. We're in the process of determining whether or not we can get that information to look at it on a case-specific basis, keeping in mind that our jurisdiction is case-specific and to identify systemic issues and trends based upon complaints and the deaths that occur. So we're still researching that. We're still talking about that from a council perspective. And once I know more, and once we have a plan of action with the information that we get, I'll make sure the board's aware of that. Does that answer the question, Ms. Keeney?
It does. Thank you so much, Mr. Parker.
All right, I see Mr. Ware's hand up, but no? Okay, so can somebody please lower his hand?
Go to the public. I want to speak, but I want to hear the public first.
Okay, so Mr. Parker, go ahead. I believe we have 3 folks.
We now have
would like
4.
to speak.
We have 4.
Okay.
So we'll go with Tom Packard.
Okay.
Packard.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can, sir. Your time is on now.
Yeah, my question was really partly answered by, I think, both Matt Graham and Janie Schutz. It's really about data. And I wanted to ask you the question that's in the sheriff's responses. They said that the regression analysis is a departure from hard data. And I taught in the School of Social Work at San Diego State for 38 years, and I'm not an expert on regression analysis, and maybe you all from CPE can answer them later, but I think regression analysis is not a departure from hard data, but it is a tool to analyze hard data. And so I appreciate the answers that you gave, and also the idea that you're going to have more dialogue with the sheriff at the March meeting. So maybe I'm just partly making a statement. Is the sheriff really just chipping away at trying to critique the data? Or if they're really curious about the data, I support that. So I just, maybe you don't need to answer the question to the sheriff or me now, but I hope the sheriff is really curious about the subtleties of the data. Janie Schutz talked about, and your researcher, about over half of the variables might not be the ones that you studied. And I hope the sheriff will be open to understanding the subtleties of those data, but at least be able to act on what you did, the solid data that you did provide. So thanks for listening.
Thank you. Next, we will go to David Myers. Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Thank you again for putting this on. I think it's critically important that we have this conversation. I still am very curious if somebody from CPE tonight can talk about the Native American contacts that we've had in San Diego County, since in California, it's very unique. Public Law 280, for those that don't know, means your local law enforcement is your law enforcement on Native country. And so in San Diego County, that's critical that we understand the context and the same type of data in Native country, Native American country, especially when it comes to the police contacts. And that we don't forget that these are sovereign nations and these are independent governments, since we are still occupying their lands. And that if someone could speak to whether or not the sheriff's department was invited to attend tonight, because it seems that they're just trying to avoid this conversation and put it off.
I can speak to the Native American population and the data. And thank you. I noted that as a question from your earlier comments, and I'm glad we get the chance to respond. So we are beholden to the data that the police provide us. We can't ride along with them and capture our own data. And so we really have to take the data that they give us. And so basically, Native Americans were not included in the use of force data. There were no use of force incidents involving Native American people that they reported. Native American people were included in both traffic and non-traffic stops, but they accounted for less than 2% of all stops. And when we have racial groups that are that small, we group them into an other category so that we don't have, dozens and dozens of racial groups trying to fit into a figure. So the answer is they didn't exist in the use of force data, and they were a very small portion of the stops data. And I can't speak to why that may be. I don't know the extent to which they patrol the native lands or, I just don't have the local context to speak to any of that, but that's how it appeared in our data.
And then in reference to the question as to whether or not the Sheriff's Department was invited, they were invited, and they are, I believe, awaiting the March meeting. As was referenced by Ms. Pintar, we had asked them to respond to the CPE report, and we gave them that 60-day period to present or have something presented at the March meeting, and I believe that they have deferred to do that. That's my understanding. Next, we will go to Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown, are you there? Dr. Brown.
Can you hear me now?
Dr.
Can you
Brown,
hear me now?
We can. You exist. All right. It's your
Okay,
up. You're
good.
up.
Yeah, just stay muted and unmuted. It keeps popping up on my phone and won't let me say anything.
All right. Well, your time starts now, Doctor.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions. I have some experience with not much, but with data. First of all, I want to thank everyone involved tonight because we have to start from somewhere doing things. But we also have to understand that, we're all people, and we have to, try to do things together and not be divisive. I think I personally had enough of that during the our previous president's reign. I would like to know more about the regression analysis and the different independent variables because it would produce different results. And I also want to know about the Sheriff's Department responded with something about they were using jail data as pedestrian stop data. Ms. Schultz, is that correct?
What I can tell you is that we had discussions with them. We used the data that they sent to us. And we are, as an organization, committed to analyzing all the data provided by an agency to ensure our numbers align with some public counts. And we do know that the use of force provided to us, we used it in certain areas because it was also provided in the San Diego County's annual use of force report. However, in saying that, in our Justice Navigator assessment, we did add a little contextual information. And that really was that the total count of use of force incidents for the Sheriff's Department included reports from their law enforcement bureau, from their detention services, which operates 6 county jails, from their court services bureau, which provides the courthouse security and transportation of inmates between the courthouse and the jail. And the incidents which took place in detention facilities and courts were excluded from analyses that are in the report that are titled Comparing Use of Force Incident Rates and Percentage of Incident Frequency Explained by Neighborhood Factors, because we too wanted to more accurately capture the neighborhood level residential population. And so again, there was discussion with the county. We added that contextual information to our report. And if there's anything else to add, that's my understanding, but I can also turn it over more to the data scientist, Matt Graham.
I have some more questions. I have a couple of more questions, if you don't mind. And I'm a little confused because the Sheriff's Department in the jails, the population comes from various towns like San Diego citizens, La Mesa, El Cajon. They all have different police departments. And I think what we need to do is take a real close look at the methodology. I was waiting for the young man to talk more about it, but I'm hoping that you all have a methodology section that would be very clear. Now, and maybe the sheriff department can answer a lot of the questions at the very next meeting. But we got a lot of people upset here tonight, and we want to make sure that what we are providing them, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that the information providing them, there's no way that it can be imputed or said that this is wrong. And if they are claiming that you used jail data to justify or to mimic or to mirror stop data or pedestrian stop data, I can't see where the two are relative. So this probably demands further discussion, and I'm willing to have that. So I'll leave it at that. We've been on a call for a while tonight, and I appreciate you all answering. And I'm sure we'll all take a closer look at this, because the information you submit is picked up by the media. Everybody gets upset. We want to make sure that people understand what they're reporting and what their suggestions and what they're or alluding to in this data and in these reports. And with that, I'll yield back to the floor. And I really appreciate you all coming and doing this presentation tonight. Thank you. Thanks again to everyone.
And I'm happy to speak to his concerns if the board would like me to.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So regarding using incidents at the jails in the stops data, we did include use of force that took place at the jails in the use of force analyses, except for the regressions. And the reason we removed them from the regressions is in the regressions, we're interested in looking at, in a particular neighborhood, controlling for crime rates, controlling for poverty rates, and considering the share of the population in that neighborhood for each racial group. Are Black people, are Latinx people more likely to have force used on them? In most tracts, the assumption then is that the demographics of the people who have force used on them should more or less coincide with the demographics of the people who live there. But in a neighborhood that has a jail, the people who are in that jail, we wouldn't necessarily expect the demographics of the people in that jail to match the demographics of the neighborhood that jail is in. So that's why we exclude them from the regression analyses. But they're in all of the other use of force analyses. So the total counts of force across the jurisdiction, the types of force used, all of that. We also, if a pedestrian stop results in force, that pedestrian stop is in the pedestrian stops data. If a traffic stop results in force, it's a traffic stop in the traffic stop data, but we're not adding the use of force data or the use of force from the jails data to the stops data to somehow add to or misconstrue those numbers. So we're very careful in the methodology we use. All of our methodology is based on published academic scholarship. So we may not always be at the cutting edge of academic scholarship, but we use methods that have been used in scholarship, peer-reviewed, used by multiple researchers. So we do everything we can to make sure that these methods are valid and robust. And as I said before, I'm happy to discuss any further particulars more. I'm happy to share my email for Dr. Brown or whoever else might like more information on this.
Mr. Parker?
Mr. Mingos, we have one additional speaker. And we have a comment from Reverend Harris. If it's okay with you, I'd like to go to Ms. Sales.
So I would like to remind folks that we're scheduled to end at 7:30. And we take it very serious. We would like to give everybody the opportunity to speak. At this point, we have had folks go speak about twice. And so we're going to give anybody, the next person you have to speak from the community, has the person not spoken before?
She has not.
Then please go ahead. And I believe then Mr. Ware is up. And then depending on how we do on time, we shall hear from Reverend Harris.
Thank you. Ms. Sales, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Your
Okay,
time starts
great.
now.
My name is Robin Sales, and we're showing up for Racial Justice North County and the Racial Justice and Equity Justice Coalitions. As Reverend Harris said, it all begins with the stops. And I think we're missing the elephant in the room is how the stops impact the number of deaths in custody in the San Diego County jails. We know it's been just an unimaginable amount, 185 plus deaths since Sheriff Gore's been sheriff. I appreciate the current CLERB board because I know you're being more activist and really looking at the issues now in a lot of different ways. So I really appreciate that. But we need to put pressure on the Board of Supervisors as well, because policy change, you know, right now the Sheriff's Department gets to do everything with impunity. And up until recently, with the CLERB, they've really gotten away with no answers or denying your requests for policy change. And I don't know how that can be rectified. I'm hoping with Supervisor Tara Lawson-Raymer's alternatives to incarceration and the use of the mobile crisis response team to prevent people from being put in jail who don't need to be in jail, we're going to start to see some changes. But my concern and our concern is how the sheriff gets away with not responding to you as an oversight body. And I think that's up to the Board of Supervisors to make that happen. And I just want to make sure to invite everybody to our community town hall next Monday night on the 28th, because then you'll hear from voices of people who've been impacted by the use of force and by the deaths in the jail and on the streets of San Diego County. Thank you.
And thank you. And so, Ms. Domingos, that with the exception of Reverend Harris, we have two board members who'd like to speak, if you'd like to go to them.
With the board members' permission, we would like to give Reverend Harris 2 minutes to speak. He is part of the community, and then go back to you board members.
Yeah, we're getting the thumbs up. So Reverend Harris, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Domingos, and you know, I just wanted to share. There was conversation earlier regarding officers and their track records pertaining to use of force. I did want to remind this CLERB board and the community that in April of last year, my Office of the People's Association of Justice Advocates, along with a broad coalition of community-based organizations, sent a letter to you all, to the CLERB board, requesting data pertaining to a breakdown of both justified and unfounded claims of use of force. CLERB conducted this study in a very quick pace of a few weeks and returned to us on April 19th a letter, April 19th, 2021, with the answers pertaining to the numbers pertaining to officers who showed consistent levels of use of force, and specifically a conversation pertaining to founded and unfounded claims of use of force in officers who had two or more. I just wanted to share these numbers because I think it's important to the discussion. First, we requested a breakdown of how many officers and employees within the county sheriff's department, from its sheriff down in its entirety, had two or more sustained use of force claims. These are incidents that are proven. And the response, CLERB identified one deputy with 2 or more cases which had excessive force where excessive force was sustained. 2, we asked how many of those officers within the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, from the sheriff down in its entirety, had 2 or more unfounded claims of use of force on the record. And CLERB identified 9 deputies with 2 or more cases in which excessive force was unfounded. And 3, we asked how many of those people within the same department have been mentioned above with sustained founded and unfounded claims were also involved in officer-involved shootings. And of the 200 deputies with 2 or more cases in which allegations of excessive force were found to be anything other than sustained, 21 of those deputies were involved in deputy-involved shootings. So I just want to identify that there has been a study that has been done by this board pertaining to this issue, and the study went for a period of time, I believe, was conducted. Mr. Parker can identify the exact time frame that the study was conducted of years between. I can't remember that, but it's very clear that there's officers who are on the department who have 2 or more sustained and unfounded use of force claims. And I think by identifying, this was data that was collected, a conversation around recommendations that can be made to the Sheriff's Department pertaining to officers that are there. But I just wanted to identify that when you have officers who have consistently shown founded and unfounded claims, these are usually the officers that are trigger happy and end up becoming those within the department, like any company, who could go rogue. And I think this is essentially what we have to look at, officers who are showing a pattern. So I just wanted to remind you of that study that you conducted per our request, and it was a Public Records Act request. I'll make sure that this is released to the full board once again so that you all can look at that. New members possibly can look at that. Mr. Parker, if you can clarify the time frame of that study, it would be good. But,
absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Harris. And that time study started from 1990, back to when we were founded. So that was the data that he was referring. And Ms. Domingos, we have Mr. Ware and Ms. Kinayu, and we have 9 minutes.
All right, thank you all so much. We're going to take our last 2 speakers for the evening, and all being equal, we should be ending punctually at 7:30. I think stack was Mr. Ware and Ms. Kinayu. I believe you're muted.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Mingles. Appreciate it. Thank you, Reverend Harris. Also, great information. Thank you for reminding us of that report. I just wanted to represent real quick one group that the data didn't speak about, and that's the as the law enforcement liaison to many of our great officers and deputies in this county for the last 25 years. Are some of the best people I've ever met have been in that uniform. And I want to represent them because I know for a fact that those great people, deputies and officers that I'm working with, they're upset with this report as well. And so that being said, I would like to encourage them to police themselves, because as a person with an athletic background and working on and playing on teams, we always knew who was not giving their best or doing up and up in what we do. And I say that with our officers and deputies also, to hold each other accountable. There's a standard out there. And if someone is not meeting the standard on a regular basis, first of all, it's to start with our officers and deputies to either coach them up or coach them out. And so I'm looking at encouraging them to do that in this situation. And Reverend Harris made a comment earlier when he first came on about us listening to the sheriff's report or response, but not just listening to what they say. I remind Reverend Harris, and he knows it very well, Romans 2:13, that says, "For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law that shall be declared righteous." So we as a board are not only going to listen to what they're saying, just like people are not only going to listen to what we're saying as a board, we're going to listen to what they do. And so we're excited to work with them. We know we have a lot of great deputies and a lot of great officers out there, and we want to work with them, continue to support them as we get better together. Thank you.
Ms. Kinayu?
Thank you. I believe my question should be answered rather shortly or quickly. Ms. Schultz, I had a question in regards to the data and I may have missed it and I apologize, but do you take information and separate it based on LGBTQ status, specifically trans people who Black and Brown compromise some of the most stopped and some of the most violent against it? People that are taken in by the Sheriff's Department more recently within the jails.
Matt, I'm going to turn that one over to you since it's related to the more the data side, the science side.
Yes, and thank you for that question. That is something that we are definitely open to looking into, and it's something that we have on our radars. The problem is we rarely receive data identifying more than a couple of incidents involving non-binary folks or LGBTQ folks. And we have a general practice that if we have too few observations of a given sociodemographic group, we're not going to include them because we don't want to risk identifying them. And this stems from some work we've done with surveys, but if we have a small population, it's possible that they could be identified. And so, if we get to the point where we receive data sets that have, 10, 20 or more incidents involving transgender or LGBTQ folks, we'd be happy to include them and look into disparities involving them. It's just not something we see very often, if ever. In the data, I'm not saying that they're not stopped. I'm just saying that that's not typically recorded in the data. So.
Would it be all right if I added one thing to that? I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Just one quick observation, just from looking at data from across the country. I want to echo what Matt said there. Is it's very, very rare for us to receive data that indicates well, let me put it this way. We often get biological sex of individuals, and it's the perceived biological sex of someone, but rather do we get information on the gender of an individual that's involved in a stop or a use of force. This is something that we're starting to see with RIPA data in California, but with RIPA coming up to speed and things like that, it's going to take some time to get some more data from the California side. But at least in my experience, I think California is one of the only states where I'm seeing information on gender for individuals rather than perceived sex.
All right, we are at 7:27. If we do not have any other comments or questions for CPE, I would like to thank everyone for taking time out of their Tuesday to join us today. And I would like folks to also please be on the lookout for our flyer for Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. It'll also go for 2 hours. And it will be pretty much the same format as now, but our focus will be on the statewide audit that was released, I believe, on February 3rd. And we will also invite community members, organizations, families, impacted families, Sheriff's Department, everybody who is somehow connected with the issue to please show up and join us and just have your voices heard. And we're doing our best to make sure that folks are actually giving a comfortable space where they feel they can share and speak their truth without having to apologize and being concerned about how they might come across. So that being said, I would like to ask my co-moderator if he has any other words he would like to say. But before that, I would like to thank the members of the ad hoc committee. We have been meeting weekly. We have Mr. G.I. Wilson, my co-chair Tim Ware. We also have Ms. Bonnie King, who has said nothing tonight. And I don't know if she would like to say something for a few seconds before we close out. And then we have myself on that committee. So we all meet once a week religiously every Wednesday evening for about an hour. And we take this very seriously. And we know as a board, we can do better. So Bonnie, if you would like to say something, please go ahead.
I would. I'm just very, very, very happy with the outcome of the meeting tonight. I think that we addressed a lot of issues that needed to be addressed, and we did a good job. And I'm looking forward to the next one even more. And thank you, Buki and Paul, for putting this, for being moderators. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, so Paul, any last words to close us out? And we should be ending punctually at 7:30.
Mr. Ware, do you have anything first? Your hand is still up.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the date for the next meeting. I thought you said the 22nd.
For the town hall, so to have this special format to invite folks, just like we're doing for CPE, it is March 22nd.
Okay.
Very, very well. And Mr. Mingos, thank you very, very much for your moderating skills tonight and keeping me on track and really making this town hall happen. This is to you and the ad hoc committee, and I really appreciate the dedication that I've seen. It's been an honor for me to work with this new board. I think the public had every reason. There's a lack of trust, of course, on CLERB based on our history. We readily admit that, but I think you'll see with the staff that we have, with the board members that we have, and with our current government supporting us moving forward, you're going to see a more proactive CLERB, obviously operating in an independent fashion, but within its rules and regulations, charter and code, so that we can actually be relevant and we can actually make some long-lasting changes that may need to be made on the part of the Sheriff's Department and Probation Department. I'm also excited about the relationship that we do have and that we are fostering with the departments, both departments. They are being responsive to us and collaborative. And so I think this is the very beginning of making some successful changes to help law enforcement provide its best possible service in the county of San Diego. So with that, finally, obviously, I want to thank the 4 members of the Center for Policing Equity for coming in tonight from all over the country and sharing the reasons for your report and the rationale behind it. I want to thank you all.
All right, without further ado, I'm not quite sure if we pass it back to Vice Chair Delaney to close us out officially, to adjourn this meeting.
I think we should do that, yes.
Yes.
I think we need to recognize the other board member of the ad hoc committee before we leave, Mr. G.I. Wilson.
I did. He was the first person I recognized.
I missed that. I'm very sorry.
Well, I'd like to echo what everyone else said. Thank you, ad hoc committee members. Buki, you did a great job tonight. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, community members, CPE members. This has been an excellent town hall meeting, and I wish everybody the best, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney.